This is Scott Leberecht, and you're listening to the Cinematography podcast.
The following podcast contains explicit language. You're listening to the Cinematography podcast presented by Hot Rod Cameras, a program about the art, craft, and philosophy of the moving image and the people who make it happen. Coming to you from the world headquarters of Hot Rod Cameras in Hollywood, California, are your hosts, Ben Rock and Ilya Friedman.
Hey, Ilya, how's it going?
Hey, Ben, it's going okay. How about you?
Awesome. I can't wait to get into this interview today. We brought up Jurassic Punk, the documentary Jurassic Punk, and as it happens, I am actually friends with Scott Leberecht. I haven't seen him in several years because he lives up in Seattle now. But right after we did it, you were like, hey, let's see if we can get him on the show. And we talked to Alana, and she's like, yeah, let's see if we can get him on the show. And then I reached out to him, and he was like, yeah, fuck yeah, I'll do the show. So
bing,
so
bang, boom. Just like that. Done.
Just like that, we got Scott Leberecht on. And I feel like it couldn't be a better week because it just got announced that Scott Leberecht's first feature, Midnight Sun, is getting a Blu-ray release this week.
Nice.
Yeah, it just came out. Our mutual friend and his producer, Matt Compton, just kind of sent out a big thing about it. And it's very different than Jurassic Punk. Jurassic Punk is obviously a documentary about the VFX industry. But I think Midnight Sun is a damn fine horror film. Like, it's really well done. Great characters. A lot of people compared it to the George Romero movie Martin, which, you know, is maybe one of Romero's lesser seen, but it was like Romero always said it was his favorite of his own films. Like a really cool character study vampire movie. So check it out if you get a chance.
That sounds awesome. I'd totally check it out.
And now, Close Focus.
Hey, Ben, it is time for our close focus. But unlike other weeks where sometimes we're, grasping at what the topic du jour is, we have an embarrassment of stories to talk about. Where would you like to start?
Oh, man. Yeah, it's a big close focus roundup this week. So as we're recording this Tuesday night, this morning, we found out that a humongous assortment of A-list actors sent a letter to SAG-AFTRA, basically encouraging them to take a hard line after SAG president Fran Drescher. Yes, that Fran Drescher from The Nanny. She's the president of SAG.
Sorry.
No comment. After Fran Drescher said something publicly that made it sound like they were making real progress on the negotiation, and again, big actors like Meryl Streep and Jennifer Lawrence and Rami Malek. You can look it all up. There's a Variety article we can link in the show notes that also has a link to all the actors, and it's a huge number of actors. You can also read the full text of it. But basically, it's A+++ list actors basically saying, like, the SAG membership has already had an authorization vote to go on strike if they decide to go on strike. And so they're basically saying to hold the AMPTP company's feet to the fire.
Make sure they get the best deal possible. Yeah.
Well, yeah, because I feel like a lot of people in this business believe that we're sort of at an existential crisis moment. And if they don't push harder, that it's already hard to make a living in this business, as you and I both know. And it's about to get harder if SAG doesn't take a harder line position. So anyway, this all comes down the same week as on last Friday, I believe. The Directors Guild, which I am a member of, voted 87% to ratify the contract as proposed by the AMPTP, or as agreed to between the AMPTP and the Directors Guild. I don't really think I'm allowed to say what the Directors Guild does behind closed doors, but they had their annual meeting last weekend and I went to it. They had it at the Beverly Hills Hilton, which I'd never been to. Fancy pants. And they did that because it has more seating capacity than the DGA Theater, and they knew that like a giant chunk of their membership was going to be there because people are
unemployed.
Well, they're very concerned about the deal that the DGA just struck with the AMPTP company. So more interesting days to come because the Writers Guild going on strike. I was talking to an editor of a TV series who will remain nameless, and they were saying that because of the Writers Guild strike, they're editing shows that were written before the strike, but they're not allowed to change one word.
Yeah, I heard that the Fritz Lang television series also got shelved because writing wasn't finished, and it sounds like that's never going to come to be. That was a Sam Esmail project. And so
oh man, that's a bummer.
I know. I was really looking forward to it. Okay, well, there's other stuff going on too. California lawmakers just ratified incentives for the subsidy program for film in the state. And I know this is a topic near and dear to your heart in particular, but they've outlawed live ammo. They've outlawed, not live ammo, live guns. They've outlawed blanks on set.
So I saw that. But it's kind of a redundancy because the DGA deal that just got ratified also bans live ammo on set.
Well, I guess if you do it in California, you're doubly screwed now then. So that's,
I should talk to some of my friends who are armorers to see how they feel about this, because the people I know who are armorers are the safest people on earth. They're really, this is what they do for a living.
It's their livelihood. Yeah, absolutely. They have to take it super seriously.
They take great pride in how seriously they take the safety on set. And I know that I've come on here many a time and railed against having live ammo on sets and how I would prefer to not have live ammo on set. But I also do feel...
And we're talking about blanks as live ammo. We're not talking about actual bullets. Because, there is actual gunpowder and parts of the shell, the shrapnel can fly out of the barrel. I just want to make sure that anyone listening understands that a blank is a live round. That is real gunpowder that is used to fire something. And even though they're not intending for a portion of the bullet to fly out of the chamber, sometimes that happens.
Well, sometimes that happens, as it did with The Crow, which was in, 1993, where a dummy round was put into the chamber behind a blank charge, and it basically turned it into a bullet because the armorer was dismissed and it was just a props person doing it at that point. And Brandon Lee was killed on set. Yeah. And then, of course, the tragedy on the set of Rust,
which was actually live ammo. Yeah. But
that was just a freaking bullet. Yeah. And I feel like the Rust thing is what's made everyone talk about this, but I also feel like there hasn't been a good reason to have live ammo on a set for a long time. But at the same time, I do think that it's worth mentioning that we're ruining the livelihood of armorers who, their whole job is to make firearms handling safe. And the jamoke on the set of Rust should not be in anyone's mind the industry standard of
Far
what
from it.
armors.
Yeah.
Hundreds of movies and TV shows have been using live ammo.
Thousands.
For decades and decades. And, we haven't had a serious issue since The Crow. But that being said, I still am
there's been
personally against
plenty
it.
Of close calls, plenty of people who were shot. They weren't killed. There's lots of people who did get injured. So I don't want to minimize it. And I know people who were hit by, shrapnel. It
happens. And I always say too, under the best of circumstances, every time you pull out a blank gun, you've just kissed away 30 to 45 minutes of set time because you have to safety everything. You have to put out plexiglass. You have to give out earplugs. You have to put plywood in front of stuff. You have to have a safety meeting where everyone discusses exactly what's going to happen. And it's a time suck. It's an unnecessary time suck if really what you're getting out of it is less than one frame of muzzle flash and some smoke. And a little bit of verisimilitude out of a gun that's making a big loud noise. Yeah, it's quite a verisimilitude tax, and I feel like you can always just take that care and work a little harder with your actors if you're working with airsoft or similar guns. I wonder if armorers. I guess you don't really need an armorer per se if you're doing everything with airsoft guns, though.
Probably not. But I actually wouldn't mind talking to an armorer on the show. I know that they got to be really against this, but I think that it's, I don't think their job goes away, but I think their job completely changes because really their number one priority was safety. And now in theory, everyone should be safe. So
yeah. And I also wonder if you're making like a John Wick kind of a movie that is just full of gunfire, if there's a way to get a waiver for it. Anyway.
Yeah, I don't know. Hey, we should also talk about Brad Pitt's Plan B. They just inked a deal to develop a Audible project with Bradford Young.
Bradford Young,
friend of the show, cinematographer. Yeah, Bradford Young.
Amazing. He shot Arrival. He shot Selma. And if you haven't heard the interview with Bradford and you're listening to the sound of my voice, go find it and listen to it. He is a fascinating person.
It's a two-parter.
An amazing story. And we always talk art, craft, and philosophy. We always tell people that's our focus. And I feel like Bradford leaned heavy into philosophy. And not as many people do that as you would think.
We should also mention Julian Sands, famous actor, was just discovered. I guess he was hiking solo in a remote area of California during the winter.
Mount Baldy, it was when we had we were having serious storms, and he's been missing for whatever, 6 months.
Yeah. Well, they did confirm that they found him very, very sad for his family and everyone who was a fan of Julian Sands. So
I actually met him once. Janelle Riley, who we've had on the show many times, introduced me to him briefly at a party or something. And he was a very nice guy.
Well, I have relatives who do solo camping and adventuring and stuff, and we always tell them, make sure you let everyone know where you're going to be, because that's a scary thing.
Well, yeah, what happened was too, like, it was just unprecedented storms in California this year.
It was 10 feet of snow up there. It's crazy. Yeah. Okay, so moving on, one last order of business, and I promise we will cover this in more detail, but I attended VidCon this last week, which is sort of the industry conference event for new media, digital media, streaming media in relation to social media. So the YouTubers and stuff of the world. And it's very interesting the way it's set up, and there is a very savvy industry track. So I think with the headlines of VidCon always is like famous YouTubers show up and then a bunch of people in the community level pack into these places and hear them speak. And then there's a second level, which is the creator level, which they sort of like, creators helping creators, like learning how to do stuff. And then there's the industry level, where it's just where I spend all my time, where they really talk about the business. And I have to say, I have been a tourist for the last, decade, sort of following this. I couldn't really understand the business models. I mean, I've certainly, laughed and mocked at, the demise of Quibi. I think we all kind of picked that one, not thinking that was actually going to be a real thing, but also sort of like the MCNs that which some studios paid huge hundreds of millions of dollars for, and what kind of value they actually got out of them at the end. I couldn't really understand the economics of social media up until this point, and sort of the confluence of traditional media and social media coming together. But I will say that after this year's VidCon, I now actually feel like I have a very clear picture and understand it. And so for the first time ever, I'll be able to actually give like a real in-depth report, and maybe I'll play some clips of some of the sounds of the show. And oh my God, there was like a lot of talk about like Vice going under and the reasons for Vice going under, and same thing with like BuzzFeed. And so there's a bunch of stuff that I can pull into this, which I think will be pretty interesting, and we'll save it for a future episode, but coming up real soon. Yeah.
No, that sounds really cool. I'd love to talk more about that.
All right. So then why don't we get to the interview?
Here we go. Here's Scott Leberecht.
The Cinematography Podcast Interview.
So I'm here, and by here I mean talking from LA to Seattle,
Yes.
Correct? With my friend Scott Leberecht. Scott Leberecht is an amazing director. He directed a horror film called Midnight Sun that if you haven't seen it, stop what you're doing and go check it out. It's really awesome. Scott is a storyboard artist. He's been working in the VFX world, but he also directs films, including Life After Pi, which was an amazing documentary about the downfall of rhythm and hues and sort of the downfall of the VFX industry in general, right after Life of Pi came out. And you have a new movie that is out now called Jurassic Punk that I just thought was a phenomenal character study, but also a great film history lesson. So thanks for coming on the show.
Awesome. It's good to be here, Ben. It's been a long time.
I know
We've known each other for a while. We've seen a lot together.
We've seen some shit.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, well, let's start by talking about Jurassic Punk, because I've been hearing about it for a while, and it played South by. You have a background, obviously, in the visual effects industry. You're not in there, to my knowledge, coding. You're not doing what Steve Williams was doing. You're an artist. You're an amazing artist. But what got you into the VFX industry?
Well, I was studying and getting a degree in industrial design in Cincinnati, Ohio, at the University of Cincinnati School of Design. And while I was there's an internship program, or co-op program, they call it, that has you go and work at corporate companies as an intern for several months and then come back and keep doing your work at the university. Well, one of the local companies that would hire industrial designers was Kenner Products, which was, obviously the place that did all the Star Wars toys. And and I got an internship with Kenner Products. And at that point, it was 1992, I think. And I walked in to see dinosaurs everywhere in this toy company, on the design floor. And they were Stan Winston's maquettes. And so I'm like, why are there...
The actual ones?
Yes, they cast... Stan Winston shop cast maquettes to send off to Kenner so that they could make the toys based off of those maquettes. So I was like, what are all these dinosaurs here? Because no one had heard at all anything about some movie called Jurassic Park coming out, or that it was coming. And so that was my first exposure to sort of how tightly intertwined Kenner was at the time with the movie industry. And that was when I started to learn more about what goes on in the movie industry in terms of design. And that was when I found out that Charlie Bailey, who was a model maker in the ILM model shop from the 70s on, was a graduate of my university and my exact industrial design school.
Oh,
so
wow.
I found out that he's this alumni, and I'm standing here at this university, the same university that this guy that made the Millennium Falcon,
Oh, that's crazy.
Is where. So that kind of opened my mind up to like, oh, wow, there's a lot more possibilities for me in the movie industry than I ever imagined. And that was when I kind of switched and decided to start tailoring all my work toward design for movies. And so that's when I started learning about how to do storyboards and how to really design things for visual effects and animation.
Wow, that's incredible. I didn't realize that, doing Jurassic Punk sort of brings you full circle with Jurassic Park, that sort of sparked your interest in it.
Yeah, it did. It kind of started it all. And so it was incredible to see Jurassic Park when it opened, because I was such a effects geek, like a total like reading Cinefex every episode or every
you and me both.
I
talk about it all the time.
Yeah. And so I was a total like weird guy in my friend group, because no one else knew all these sort of Hollywood secrets of how they did these effects and how they do these effects. So on the day that Jurassic Park opened, I went and saw it with like 6 of my friends who don't know anything about effects. And the first Brachiosaurus comes out on the screen, and I started crying because I knew that what I was seeing was a watershed. I knew it was all going to be different after this movie. And they were like, "What is wrong with you?" and I was just trying to explain to them through my tears, like, you don't understand. What you're seeing is not a guy in a suit. It's not a puppet. It's nothing that was ever physically made. It's a computer graphic, and it doesn't exist anywhere except on the screen. And they were just like, "What? Shut up." They didn't believe me or whatever. And so it was weird to see this, the first thing ever where you were like, somebody who really knows how these things are done, to see something where you're like, there is no way that's a puppet. But also at the same time, saying to yourself, there is no way that's computer graphics, because computer graphics were not that.
It was Super Mario Brothers 3, at that time,
Or Terminator 2, which is like, Chrome,
But Terminator 2 I remember going to see Terminator 2 with a friend of mine, because I wanted to be a makeup effects artist, and I was for a few years. And I went to see it with a friend of mine who was into that stuff as well. And when T2 was over, he looked at me, he's like, "Welp, we're screwed." And I was... I was 19 years old when that movie came out. So like, I was like, well, I guess I better find something else to do with my life.
Yeah. I remember having to sit down out in the hallway of the theater, like on the floor after watching T2. I was so blown away. I couldn't even move. Like, it was so incredible. So that was an exciting time. Like those 3 movies, it's Terminator 2 and Jurassic Park,
which you cover extensively in Jurassic Punk. And they do have one big thing in common, being the main subject of your documentary. So before we get to him, though, what were the next steps you took to get into the VFX world? And did it ever occur to you to become one of the people who was writing the code or creating the VFX? Because to my knowledge, you pretty much always stayed as a concept artist and a storyboard artist and paper and pencils. I'm sure at some point you maybe switched to a Wacom tablet or something, but still an illustrator more than a guy who gets in and mucks around with code.
Yeah. So I ended up applying in my final year at the university, applying for an internship at Lucasfilm, and specifically in the ILM art department. I ended up not getting in the first time I applied, and then I applied again. And the second time I actually got the internship.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah. And so that's one thing everybody should know is like, don't let the first time they say no be the last time you ever try. So always try more than once. Anyway, that was a 3-month internship where my mind completely opened up, and I had access to archives and flat files of artwork of all the movies of my childhood, and I could see all and how it was all constructed via these little scratched out pencil drawings on storyboards or concept art that was all done with traditional medium. Now
Man,
in the
I
art
would
department-
shit my pants if I saw
Oh, it
that
was
stuff.
insane. I'd be there till midnight, just going through all those files and just absorbing all that artwork.
Wow.
And so it was then that I started to realize like what it was going to take to maybe get a job there, a full-time job there. And they were using Photoshop in the art department at that point, but I literally started using Photoshop as it was Photoshop version 1. So there was no layers at that time. There was none of that. There was no like filters or different like ways to make a layer appear a certain way. So it was exciting because there was very few people who even, knew how to use computers at the time or obviously use Photoshop at the time. And so I was like that kid that was like coming into production meetings with concept art that, I had one meeting with Nilo Rodis, who is the creator of the designs of the all the ships in Star Wars, and he was, oh my God, he was art directing or production design on the Green Mile, and I came in to show him my concept art for the effects in the Green Mile.
Oh
and
wow!
I'll never forget him kind of like looking at the art and then looking at me with this like, how the fuck did you do that? And I was like, wow, I'm impressing Nilo. This is awesome.
That's awesome.
It was a cool time because again, like all this new digital stuff was just not in anyone's wheelhouse except ours at that time. And ILM was just this complete monster in terms of having command of that stuff. And if you get an internship at a place where you're working with your heroes, you're going to realize they're just human beings. And that's when your own mind can start opening up about your potential, because it was incredible for me to be in a meeting with Tim Burton or anyone who I thought was a god and knew exactly how to get what they wanted. And for them to be looking at me and going, will you please help me?
Yeah.
like, I don't know what exactly this should be. This is something I need you to figure out. Was like me going like, wow, he's just like any of us trying to find, they're just like any of us trying to find our way through. So it's easy to like idealize your heroes and think they have total command of everything. And like, they have all the answers all the time. And then when you start working with them and you realize, no, they're just people trying to find their way through a problem, just like anyone. It really makes you kind of start to go, wow, what more could I do? What levels could I reach that I never thought I could, or never even imagined I could? So it's really great to have experiences like that, where you actually go where your heroes are. When I was actually called to a meeting where Steve Williams was going to be in the meeting, and this guy walks in that looks like a mechanic, with a greasy shirt and acting like the most like insanely macho kind of guy you can imagine.
Yeah, he's like for people who haven't seen the documentary, and please just go see the documentary. It's on Canopy. You can watch it for free. But he's a big, tall, broad-shouldered, man's man kind of guy. Like, I picture him with a beer in his hand. Yeah, and like an auto mechanic's kind of shirt. 5 seconds into your interviews with him, you can see he's a major intellect, but he's not wearing the costume of that person.
That's right. At the time, one thing I want to mention too is at the time, there was kind of a problem with finding talent that could run the computers or use the computers that also were really good artists, that were artists, traditionally trained artists. There seemed to be this big problem at that time, and it makes sense that traditionally trained artists wouldn't go near a computer.
It's all the coding and math and calculus and
the computer guys were not people who ever had any interest in art. They were just interested in like solving these problems of shading and lighting and rendering and modeling and all that stuff. So Steve was an extremely rare example of someone who was trained traditionally as an artist, but could also run the computer. And so he was kind of one of the first of those who actually knew how to do both. And I think like his interest in trying to figure things out and deconstruct things and disassemble things in a funny way was the key to his success in that world. But when you apply deconstructing and that power of deconstructing and disassembling things to a system that you find yourself under, a guy like Steve will immediately start to go, why is this happening to me? Why is this happening to these people I work with? Mm-hmm. This system is weird. This system is not, set up for us. It's set up for them. That kind of stuff is what would sort of haunt him the more he worked at ILM, the more he experienced that bureaucracy or corporate nature, which we all know is like typical of all corporate companies and typical of all situations, group situations where there's power dynamics.
Well, and also the power dynamics in like a Hollywood studio, like it's one thing if you're working at a textile mill and you have a boss, but when your boss is Steven Spielberg or, you know, in this case, maybe Dennis Muren, these are people who are revered and on network television and giving interviews with Barbara Walters and shit. And even another order of magnitude beyond somebody like the kind of guy Steve appears to me based on your documentary. He doesn't seem like he's the kind of guy who would get sucked up into the world of putting on airs and
well, and also he's constantly being told like, this isn't the way we do it. You know, this isn't the way we do it. And that is literally like gasoline on fire to him. Like when he thinks that there's an established system that he thinks isn't working properly, he will never stop until it's fixed, until he can fix it, or he can at least call enough attention to it that it will.
That's so interesting. I hadn't thought about that because like the very same brain that figured out how to make walking dinosaurs is also looking at the organization of Industrial Light and Magic and saying this is bullshit.
Yeah. And so with that, with his swagger and all his sort of, I want to say like, you know, let's not be serious for a moment. Can we all just tell jokes for a moment? Can we all just talk about our pets for a moment? That's the kind of guy he was in these meetings. And so as somebody who really wants to humanize the process, he was like the best person for that. So a lot of people had a lot of love for his warmth at that place because the place was there was so much pressure that everything had to be about the work a lot of times. I'm not saying we didn't have a shit ton of fun at ILM, but it was also incredibly stressful. And the pressure was on millions of dollars. These are AAA movies. These are tentpole movies for studios. The whole world is going to see. You cannot fuck around.
And if there's one thing we know about James Cameron, it's that he's super laid back and, you know,
right.
just rolls with whatever.
Yeah. And so Steve was like this really, really amazing presence in a daily session or in any meeting, because he was always, he made it his mission to try and shake everybody a little bit out of that pressure and that stress and remind everybody that this should all be fun. We should be having fun. And I think that's what a lot of people really loved about him.
That's interesting. And that definitely comes across in the documentary. Now, like you as an intern or you as someone who's starting out there, would you say you became friends with him then? Or, you know, tell me about your personal relationship with him.
For me, like as an art department guy or as an artist at a place like Industrial Light and Magic, we had this really awesome place to occupy in that structure, which was our department. We were allowed to be the dreamers. We were allowed to be the ones who would just go, what would be the coolest fucking thing you can possibly imagine? And then we draw it and we make our concept art. And then that would be shown to, and we would have meetings about our concept art where people would say, what are you thinking drawing that? We can't do that, you know, or, but what it did was at least it kept us in a way in that innocent place or that almost like naive place of just dreaming up the coolest shit we can possibly imagine and not thinking about how hard is this going to be. And so I think it was smart. ILM was really smart about having an art department that could not only help the directors and the filmmakers that would come to us create the things they were envisioning, but it also created in a way a nice paper trail of approved artwork that, you know, they could say like, this is what you said you wanted. You know, and so once we started working on it, that artwork, that concept art, a lot of times acted as a bit of a reference point for what was in a way negotiated as part of the deal. This is what you wanted. And so I think change orders might have been a lot easier back then because we were in the power position. There was only a few places, if not just ILM, who could do this work. So we had a lot of
like were there any real competitors? When does Digital Domain come in? I know Weta isn't until like the late 90s, early 2000s.
Yeah. So one of the first things that I remember being impressed with was Weta's cloth on the Frighteners.
Oh yeah.
In the 90s. And that was like the first like, whoa, we're just figuring out how to do that shit and they're doing it already. And then I think Sony was the first to sort of lure away Ken Ralston, who then lured away a lot of people to work at Sony. And Sony maybe became one of the first competitors. But then there just a ton started cropping up by the end of the 90s. So we were quickly becoming a place that was just like most places. You know, a lot of things I hope that people realize about Jurassic Punk is that it is about Steve Williams as the main character of a band of mavericks and people who were thinking differently. But it also took someone like Scott Ross, who's on the sort of business front. Scott Ross was one of the ones who came from video and advertising and understood digital. And so he understood what Steve was trying to do and Mark were trying to do and he kind of knew that was the future too. But it really took not just the artist. It does take other people to also say, like, I see it too. And then make it happen. Scott Ross was one of those guys. But yeah, it was the time of like everybody kind of jumping ship at ILM because they were getting huge offers to work at other places and build a similar studio somewhere else.
So a little bit back, though, to your personal friendship with Steve over the years. Like, were you staying in touch with him over the years? Because you were bopping around. You were at different VFX companies. I think when I met you, I don't think you were at Rhythm and Hughes yet. I forget where you were.
I was doing a lot of work when we met for Imaginary Forces.
That's who it was. Yeah.
So Kyle Cooper and those guys, they were continually hiring me to do storyboards and concept art and stuff for their commercials and for their opening movie credits and stuff. So that was a really cool place to work in LA.
I love Imaginary Forces. I think it's the thing that made them was they did the opening credits for David Fincher's Seven. Yes. And it was like the most amazing thing anyone had ever seen at that point. And then they just specialized in doing unbelievably amazing opening credit sequences and commercials and stuff.
Yeah, if there's any students listening, they should understand that the opening credits for Seven literally changed the way opening credits were made forever since then.
Yeah, look at any HBO or premium cable opening credits. I mean, look at the opening credits for Yellow Jackets. It almost looks like the opening credits for Seven.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that movie still holds up so well.
Brilliant. So one of the best.
Yeah. So basically here's how it went down. So I met Steve when I was an intern, and then I started working at ILM shortly after as an artist full-time, doing concept art and storyboards. And he had a commercial for Energizer, the Energizer Bunny commercial. And the Energizer Bunny commercial had this little flea jumping around in its fur. And so I did these storyboards of that little flea jumping around inside the fur of the Energizer Bunny. And Steve saw them and really, really liked my style because I was really heavily influenced by Warner Brothers animation and all that stuff, the same stuff that made, and Tex Avery and all the same stuff that made him who he is. And so he immediately recognized that maybe kindred spirit in those drawings. And so we met, and it turns out we were both kind of straightforward, almost to our detriment, honest about things. And it was refreshing for a lot of people, but it was also disconcerting sometimes. And so we also had that going where it was like we weren't afraid to sort of say what we thought, and we weren't socially careful. And so I think that made us liked, but also not liked. It's a weird thing when you think about it in a corporate environment. The person who says what they're thinking sometimes is the person who everybody really appreciates. And it's a nice breath of fresh air. And it's nice that somebody said it. And I'm glad I didn't say it, but that's also the person that's going to have a target on their back.
Well, also, again, in the film industry, like if the director comes in and says, I think that we should have the giant spider come in through this window, and you go, well, if you're bringing it through this other window, then here are all the other things you could do. Your idea might be better, but also you might have just stepped on his toes. And, Or an insecure director will be like, you can't, like, no, do it my way.
Or only that reason.
Yeah, exactly. And like, oh, so you're directing it now? That kind of thing. Having somebody like you or having somebody like Steve on your team, the benefit is you throw an idea to you, and as long as everyone's open and honest about it and check their ego at the door. But that's the hard thing, is these are people who professionally get their egos stroked, and it's hard to get them to check their egos at the door. Some of them, not all of them. I've worked with a lot of people who are big in the industry who are wonderful at that. You just never know.
Yeah, it's a minefield, and it's really critical to know when to keep your mouth shut.
Yeah.
I think if you want to survive in a corporate environment.
And Steve doesn't seem like someone who ever would keep his mouth shut in any environment. It doesn't matter if he's in the room with James Cameron or Steven Spielberg. He's going to speak his mind. Yeah. And I feel like if you're in the room with those guys, you're in that room for a reason, right? Like they should know that Steve is there to make the thing better.
And I would just say that, Steve was really good at knowing when he had to show respect and be, in those kinds of high level meetings, he was good in those. But what I'll say is he wasn't really invited to a lot of those meetings. And the reason is because of the way he was in every other meeting.
Yeah.
And so it's like, so when you see this is the guy who says what he thinks and is not afraid of anybody and has no regard for authority and even is kind of likes to push back on authority. Well, when it comes up that there's going to be a meeting with Steven Spielberg, the people who are nervous about those meetings are going to be like, yeah, let's have Steve sit out on this one. Let's not.
And I think that in your film, one of the things that kind of comes across, and I hope I'm not mischaracterizing this in any way, but Dennis Muren almost comes across as, I'm not going to say his bad guy, but kind of his bête noire in the film, because Dennis Muren keeps winning the Oscars and then not mentioning Steve, who basically built the entire framework by which the Oscar was won. You kind of look at what happened in Jurassic Park and frankly to the entire VFX industry as a direct result of one person, and that's Steve. And you kind of go, he never got his due. He didn't even get his due when they were winning Oscars for the work he was doing. Mm-hmm. So talk a little bit. I mean, is Dennis Muren just sort of like the pressure point where Steve was brushing against ILM as an institution? Was it more personal than that? Or, how did that work?
Well, I think one of the most fascinating things about diving into this story, and I'll say it, that when I first started making this film and knowing I wanted to make this film, and I bought a camera and was like, fuck it, I got to do this. I know all these people. I know the history of this. I know so many people that would be willing to talk about specifically this moment in time between the Abyss and Jurassic that I wanted to cover. And so I just wanted to do an ensemble thing where it was like everybody talks about what they saw and what they did and the struggles they had. And that was the film I started making. And Steve was going to be what I always imagined to be like the sort of funniest guy of the ensemble, or the guy that's like clearly like the crazy one in the ensemble.
So you weren't even setting out to make a documentary about him. It just became
And so as I started gathering all the stories and started assembling it, I started to realize that I was making something that was looking way too much like a making of or DVD extra or a dry reportage of how did they do it. And
frankly, it would have been light and magic. It would have been almost the identical documentary that they made.
Exactly. And so I started to realize I really need maybe just make this about one person who has the most interesting arc as a character, and then let all the other voices tell us the story of what happened in those years through this guy. And so the first person I thought had the most interesting and amazing arc was Phil Tippett.
Oh, well, definitely. Yeah.
And so I was like, this guy has the biggest arc of all of them. And in this ensemble is like, it really went from completely invested in traditional effects techniques and had to change his whole studio to computer in a way that must have been an incredible assault on his own ego and system of thought.
He's been very public about that.
Yeah,
in fact, after I watched your film, one of the things I said to my wife, Alicia, was how incredible is it to make a movie like this where Phil Tippett actually feels like the voice of reason and your main character has a crazier story than Phil Tippett.
Right. So I did 2 interviews with Phil, I think maybe even 3, but he was great. And I started to sort of assemble the film as if I was going to tell a story about Phil Tippett, and it was going to be his whole arc. And then as I was filming Steve, I started to also see a similar arc in him. And it wasn't until we were filming I started to realize how much his life had gone off the tracks or whatever.
Oh my God, yeah.
Because of this one critical moment in his career and in his life, that I started to make connections to Life After Pi, the documentary I made about rhythm and hues, and how I'm proud of that film because it gave the worker a voice. And I just started to see the film as like, this is an opportunity to tell an all too common story for most workers, that this is what happens to a lot of people, what happened to Steve. And so I saw it as a way to tell two cautionary tales. One is how you've got to be careful about innovating within corporate structures and basically giving away ideas that are going to make everyone else successful and rich except you. That's one cautionary tale. The other is the cautionary tale of Dennis Muren's story, and how do you want to, someday maybe occupy a position in a system the way Dennis did, and then drop the ball the way he did in terms of making sure that the people responsible for the work were acknowledged as much as possible.
Maybe this is the most pedestrian thing to point out, but it's like your film started about Phil Tippett and ended up being about Steve, sort of like Jurassic Park. Like it follows the trajectory of Jurassic Park, and anyway. So.
Yeah, it was quite a journey, and it was hard. It was a hard film to shoot because he's my friend for so many years, and to see, him going through so much.
That's the thing. And I feel like you have to be his friend to be the documentarian following like where his life is now, which is, he's not like living on the streets or anything, but he's not in that position he was in.
Yeah. And he's a million times better now than he was when I was filming. He's so much better.
Well, you see him getting sober too, right?
Yeah. And but I got to say, like, the challenge of seeing someone at a really low point in their life and then pulling a camera out of a bag and shooting them.
Yeah. And they're your friend.
Like I felt so fucked up about that for a while I was filming.
How did he feel about it?
Well, he knew what I was trying to do. He knew we talked a lot about it, about that idea of like, this is about this is a worker story. This is a story about how life can be for a worker. The things that can happen to people if they're taken advantage of, or if they give too much of themselves, right? And forget that they're going to be, 70 years old someday and need to have a retirement. It's like that kind of stuff was what we talked about why it's important for me to film him at this moment in his life. And so he got it, and he understood that was the goal, warts and all. And Steve's a warts and all guy anyway.
Yeah.
He's the guy who's like always going to say, like, I'm not afraid to share the best and worst parts of me with the world, because I think he knows innately that it could help.
Well, I know this isn't necessarily a thing in your documentary, but it's something that I complain about on the podcast all the time. And I'm in the Directors Guild and we get residuals. Writers Guild, SAG, they get residuals. And here we are in the middle of a Writers Guild strike. But somebody like Steve Williams comes along, invents the technology that is being used by every VFX company in the world right now. And even like people who are home tinkering with technology that would not exist without him. He doesn't see a penny of that ever. Like, he's not getting residuals. He doesn't get a retirement account out of that. Like that, I just kind of feel like a fundamentally unfair thing about this industry is that the movies that he helped create, the ones he personally worked on and the ones that are the great grandchildren of the ideas that he invented, he doesn't really see anything else other than what he got paid back then to do that stuff. And he's barely being acknowledged. That's why I think your film is kind of important for people to watch, especially people who are interested in the film business. But I think even if you're not interested in the film business the way it works, it's such a great character study of what he's going through. And also, like you said, it's what a lot of workers go through.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think it is poignant for people in probably any industry. I think it's unfortunately what we're dealing with is power structures and group dynamics that all eventually resemble the same thing, no matter what building you're working in.
Yeah. Well, that actually could take us a little bit to Life After Pi, which was a documentary. If I'm not mistaken, you just released that on YouTube when you finished it. I think that,
yes.
You just wanted people to see it. And it was about the downfall of Rhythm and Hughes, who went into bankruptcy while their groundbreaking work on Life of Pi was winning an Oscar. And again, I feel like you were uniquely poised with your VFX background to kind of document. And when did you have the kind of the impetus to make Life After Pi? Because I feel like you need to now complete your trilogy of your 3 documentaries about the VFX world. But what was the impetus for Life After Pi?
Well, I was working there at the time. I was art directing. Like, I had just started working at Rhythm and Hughes. Like, I was only there for about 6 months. And then I came in on a Monday morning and everybody was gone. And there were only a few people left. And they were like, oh my God, you're here. I'm like, yeah. And they're like, you didn't get let go? I'm like, no, what's happening? And that's when it all started. And so what I'll say about life after Pi is that was a very, very short window of time when effects workers felt unafraid to speak their mind and to say what was going on and to tell their stories. And that lasted like maybe a month, maybe 3 or 4 weeks before people started quieting down and not wanting to talk.
Getting political. Well, yeah, you're angry and you're like, well, I mean, because you're basically covering the way that the studios abuse the VFX companies and put them in a no-win situation where they're competing with it was just a race to the bottom budget-wise and people fighting for this work and everyone was screwed. And I feel like, of course, you would be willing to speak your mind because you're like, I can't have a career if this keeps going.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And also there was a lot of sympathy at that time for the effects workers. And that was a short window of time, but it was big at that time that people wanted to really try and understand. So that's why I made that movie. And then it gave me a real taste for documentary filmmaking and how with the right people, the right subjects and the right story, you can make a pretty impactful, dramatic film that, you would typically think you need, that needs to be scripted, but it's right there in front of you.
Well, I just looked at the time and we've taken up enough of your time. But again, I can't recommend to people highly enough that they check out Jurassic Punk. Where is the place for people to see it where it will benefit you the most?
I think Amazon is probably the easiest way to see it and also where it probably benefits me the most. And then iTunes would be the two big ones. But it is available on lots of platforms. It is available on YouTube to purchase. It is available also on Xbox and a few others.
And before we go, do you have a website or social media, anything that you would want to point people towards to find you online, see more of your work?
Yeah, you can go to JurassicPunkMovie.com, and then Jurassic Punk Movie is our Instagram. Instagram is kind of fun. I try and post to that regularly. So yeah, those are the two main places.
Well, Scott, it's great to talk to you, as always, and congratulations on making an awesome film. It's just an amazing accomplishment, and congratulations.
You too, Ben. Thank you so much for having me on. It's been great.
Hey, so that was Scott Leberecht.
All right. Thank you so much for coming on the show, Scott. And again, for anyone hearing my voice, please check out Jurassic Punk. I think I mentioned I saw it on Canopy, but you can find it on Amazon. It actually, Scott said it might benefit him more if you go buy it on Amazon. And then also check out Midnight Sun, which if you're the kind of person who's into physical media, and who isn't, they just got a re-release on Blu-ray, and it's also on Amazon. So it just got remastered and re-released.
I know I am getting more into physical media. I have started buying 4K Blu-rays. Even for some that I already owned. I think that's going to be a couple I've tried now. I've been like, wow, that looks really, really good. It looks better than my old DVD. So I skipped Blu-ray for a lot of things, but now I'm actually like the 4K.
Here's the thing about physical media is that I understand as much as anyone else why it's great to stream. You don't have to store it. You don't have to go rent it. You don't have to go anywhere. It's just there when you want it. That's cool, except for when it randomly isn't there at all. So I'll give you a very concrete example. One of my favorite John Carpenter movies is Prince of Darkness, and it was on Shudder, and then it wasn't. And it's like, God damn it, you don't know when you're going to feel like watching this stuff. So it's really not a bad idea, at least for the ones that you really love. I know back in the DVD days, we would all just go drop $20 on a DVD we'd never heard of before. I feel like it's more about like, if you really care about something, maybe support it a little bit more, but also have it on hand for when the feeling strikes you to watch it.
It's so funny that you say John Carpenter, because that was what I just got. Yes, I'm holding it up right now. I'm holding up a special box set of They Live from England, from the UK.
Wow.
But a lot of these 4K Blu-rays are not region coded, so you can watch them on any of the 4K players. I popped it in just to take a look at it. Holy crap, it looks so much better than that DVD from way back when. Anyway, so Ben, it is the short end time of the show.
And now, short ends.
I know we went on this tangent here about, physical media, but what is your obsession this week? What are you all about?
Well, I had an interesting experience this week that I feel like is worth underlining a little bit on our show. And that's a short film that I edited and was ultimately given producer credit because I helped connect the director, Gina Powers-Hendry, with a VFX person you may know, Tom Moser.
You got the fancy title.
Yeah. So we made a film called Deadhead, and it premiered Saturday night at the Dances with Films Festival. I'd be happy to talk to anyone about Deadhead. I think it's a really cool horror short. To me, in my opinion, it's going to have pretty good legs at the festival level. It's going to probably play a lot of festivals. But it played in the Midnight Shorts competition at Dances with Films. And I don't know that I've talked about Dances with Films on this podcast before, but I've had a couple of projects play there in the past. Future Boyfriend project I did in 2016 played there. I feel like, we talk a lot about the big festivals, the big brand name festivals, Sundance, Tribeca, South by Southwest, Toronto, whatever. And there's a lot of great regional festivals. And in my opinion, Dances with Films is the best general film festival, meaning that it's like features, it's shorts, it covers all genres. It's not a specialty festival. They are so organized. They have a filmmaker orientation where they have thought of everything that you could possibly ask and they lay it all out for you. They have partnerships with companies that make DCPs. The quality control on the projection and stuff is great. And when you screen at Mann's Chinese, which even though it is at the Hollywood and Highland miasma of touristy people and homeless people dressed as Elmo, it's still the screens themselves. That theater is an amazing theater with great projection, great sound. And I feel like Dances with Films is the best one that I know of in Los Angeles. I mean, really, I think the only other major festival here is AFI Festival. There are genre festivals like Scream Fest, which is phenomenal, or LA Shorts Fest, which is also a great festival. But if you're listening to the sound of my voice, you're doing a festival run, and you're wondering if you should submit to Dances with Films, I just want to say, having had two projects I was very personally involved with and then one that I kind of helped out with, it's a really solid festival. It's extremely well curated in this Midnight Shorts category. And Midnight Shorts is like a very specific thing where it's like horror, comedy, gross out, just plain weird stuff. It's stuff for a rowdy audience. And the entire program that Deadhead played in, I thought was like wall to wall. Every one of them I loved. Just a huge endorsement for Dances with Films. And if you're a filmmaker looking to submit your film, if you're on Film Freeway and you're hovering over Dances with Films, asking yourself if it's worth submitting to, I would say absolutely submit to Dances with Films.
Is it Academy qualifying?
That's a fine question. I actually don't know. I can look it up. It is, according to their FAQ, they are not Academy qualifying.
Okay. So you may have to go to another festival too if you're just looking for that. But yeah, absolutely. Sounds like a great, regional festival to get your stuff seen and to get some nice laurels on your project if it gets selected. Awesome.
Absolutely. All right. So Ilya, what is your short end?
I was talking to a client last week who was asking me all about full frame zoom lenses, specifically full frame cinema zoom lenses. This has been a thing that for a while, basically the only real games in town were the ultra expensive zoom lenses from Angenieux and Fuji. And we're talking $40,000 plus zoom lenses, very expensive, rather large. The Fujis, though, actually amazing. They actually shrunk the size quite a bit compared to what like Angenieux was doing. And then Canon got into the game, basically came up with absolutely professional grade, super high quality zooms. They called the flex zooms, and they came in about half that price, low 20s, that sort of thing. And then a couple of Chinese companies got into the full frame zoom market, most notably a company called DZO and another one called Laowa, who just this week started shipping their lenses. Now,
DZO was a sponsor of this show for some time.
They were a sponsor of the show for a long time. So I have to say that if you weren't really tracking this particular segment of the cinema lens market, you could be forgiven because there hasn't been a lot of change all that much. And a lot of the stuff that's been produced is really, really pricey. But DZO came out with these lenses called Kata, and the Kata were only available in DSLR mount. They did eventually come out with a PL mount version they called the Kata Ace, and Laowa has basically come out with a set of lenses they call the Rangers, which are also available in PL mount. And so you've got really 4 pretty decent sized companies now all building sub $50,000 lenses, and in the case of DZO and Laowa, significantly under $50,000. Like lenses are under $3,000 a piece. So it's very interesting. The quality of all these lenses is surprisingly good. Now, you absolutely do get what you pay for, but I know some people who've been buying the Canon Flex zooms, and it's got a really interesting feature in that you can actually buy a different rear section, which is user changeable, which turns it into a Super 35 lens that gets faster. So you get a wider field of view a little bit, and your 2.4 lens now becomes a 1.7 zoom, which is amazing. And on the inexpensive entry-level full-frame zooms from Laowa and DZO, those are like 2.9 stops, but man, all of them are really solid. And I'm pretty excited for Laowa in particular, because just this week I saw the notice that the first set that we had sold shipped out. So someone's about to be really happy if they haven't received the lenses yet. I know that some lenses are coming in from Laowa, and we're doing a pre-order for $99 over at Hot Rod Cameras. But all of the full frame zoom lenses these days at all these different price points are deeply impressive. And if you're in the Los Angeles, Burbank area and you'd like to demo some of these, I know that we keep at least 3 of them in-house all the time now because of their popularity. So yeah, you could come into Hot Rod Cameras and you can test and demo some of these different lenses and you can check it out. I know we've got some Canons. I know we've got some DZOs. I know that Laowas are on their way to us. So we do occasionally get the calls for Fuji, but I'd say that anyone who's really looking at this space, it's really impressive to see what can be done now for what amount of dollars. And I think the people who are bemoaning, oh, there isn't really anything out there anymore, certainly in the entry-level cinema lens market, can't say that. Now, I mean, you don't have to just go with a DSLR sort of lens, and you don't have to go with a really expensive professional uber high quality grade. There's some really good options at all these different price points. The market's matured, and I definitely think that anyone who's interested in those things should check it out, especially when you don't have that much scratch. I mean, at $3,000, these are the same sort of prices as like some DSLR lenses. So I think it's amazing. It's worth checking out.
How is it that they're able to manufacture them that cheaply?
Well, there are definitely some corners that are cut, but at the same time, will most people see them? And optically, you're not looking at huge differences, but you are looking at pretty big difference in mechanics. The mechanics tend to be very different between these lenses, and certainly the Chinese manufacturers of DZO and Laowa, definitely the DZO might be the best value, especially that original Kata, because it's in sort of like this plastic housing. It doesn't have a PL mount, but if you can live with that, it has the same optics as their much more robust PL mount version. And then Laowa's is not much more expensive. And here's a nice thing about the Laowa, the range is incredible. It'll take you from 28 all the way to 180 between the two lenses, which is just bonkers. It's not exactly apples to apples with like a Fuji Premista, and it's certainly not either with the Canon. But if you're talking about DZO and Laowa and you're looking at the two, man, they're both really, really good lenses. We've been using some of these lenses internally for our own sort of like BTS and social media production. They're good lenses, and they don't cost a lot. And if you would kind of been saying, well, I'm just going to stick with primes and the zooms are too much money, you owe it to yourself to take a look at these. I'm really, kind of blown away. Anyway, so Ben, I think it's going to about do us for this episode. Where can people find you if they want to look you up?
Please go to benrock.com. You can find all my socials, my social media. Although I did just join Blue Sky literally today, the Jack Dorsey, his new Twitter thing. So we'll see if that actually takes off. Check out my reel. I have a directing reel up there. benrock.com. Check it out. Ilya, where can people find you?
They can find me over at Hot Rod Cameras, hotrodcameras.com. But actually, I'm just going to say LinkedIn, at Ilya Friedman at LinkedIn. I've decided I'm going to lean into LinkedIn. LinkedIn is actually, it's remarkable. I probably had like 9 messages this week. I've had a lot of people starting to use it lately. So I'm going to check it out. See, I'm going to, actually give it a shot. See how it goes.
Yeah, LinkedIn isn't bad. I mean, it's all business stuff, and I find that a lot of people who reach out to me on LinkedIn literally don't know anything about who I am or what I do. They're just like trying to get me to hire them for something. But no, but I've actually like made friends on LinkedIn. It's not a bad service. Anyway, so Ilya, who should we thank this week?
Hey, let's thank Ben Katz. Ben Katz chopping and slicing and dicing all these episodes together, trying to make us not sound foolish. He's doing a pretty darn good job with that too, I'd say. Let's thank Kay Zalatracci, who made all the music in this episode and elevates the level of our show to way beyond what it would be if we had canned music. He gives us custom, incredible music, which
Boo to canned music.
Yeah, exactly. And then, of course, let's thank Alana Cody, producer extraordinaire, who has been keeping us busy with interviews and screenings and everything.
I got another one coming up, and I had a screening. The only time I could go to it was 10:40 on a Sunday.
Woo! All right.
For an interview that we have coming up.
That is one thing about Portland. They don't really have the morning screenings here. So, it's I can't do the morning screenings. It's tougher. It's tough to get in to see some things. I know.
I think it's the first time you've mentioned that you live in Portland on the podcast.
No, I mentioned it before. I'm pretty sure I mentioned it. Yeah, I don't think this is if people are really tracking me, yes, I've been living in Portland now for a year. But
oh my God, has it been a year?
I moved in July, so yeah, it's.
Oh my God,
I know it goes fast. Well, it doesn't really feel like it because I'm in Los Angeles every month at the shop, so it's constantly
and I talk to you once a week. I talk to you more than most of the people I know who live in LA. So
yeah, that's true too. All right, so Ben, I think that's just about going to do us. You want to take us out?
Thanks for listening.
This has been the Cinematography Podcast, presented by Hot Rod Cameras. Find your next camera, lens, or accessory on the web at hotrodcameras.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our show on iTunes and connect with us on Facebook and Twitter. Thanks for listening.